Good morning. My name is John Nelson, and I'm the pastor of Soma Community Church in Jefferson City, Missouri. Also, I'm a member of the ARITF, which is the Abuse Implementation Reform Task Force. We may change the name, but right now that's what it is. And I'm honored to sit here to really have a discussion for those of you online, those of you that are on the bus that are on their way here, with state leaders about how we can better engage abuse reform. And so I want my leaders here to introduce themselves so you can kind of get to know them. And then we're going to have a conversation about what is next for our states.
Well, good morning. I'm DJ Horton. I'm the senior pastor of Church at the Mill in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and I chaired our South Carolina Sexual Abuse Task Force.
Good morning. My name is Thomas Jordan. I serve with Oklahoma Baptist in HR and legal.
And my name is Brad Eubank, and I'm also blessed to be on the ARITF with John. And also I serve as the chairman of our current task force in the state of Mississippi as well.
So the title of the conversation today is Our States Helping Prevent Sexual Abuse. And we're going to talk a myriad of different questions. We're going to address some what I call BHAGs, the big hairy roosters in the room. But we also want to talk through what exactly we can do and what are the resources that we're providing to move us forward as a convention, because we are a convention of churches. And when we talk about our church, we talk about that the local church is the home of the Southern Baptist. And so we want to really resource our local churches. So let me get into the questions, gentlemen. As we ground this conversation around what's foundational, that's what we want to talk about first. We seem to talk about sexual abuse, and some may be experiencing compassion or even conversation fatigue. We're just kind of done with the conversation. It's been 3 years we've talked about this. Why do we keep talking about this issue, and why is it fundamentally not political?
You want me to go first?
Yeah.
Couple of things. First of all, it's a very hard, sad, difficult, and complex issue to address. So the idea that we can talk about it in a 12-month period, take it through a cycle of national conventions and state conventions and handle it, to be honest with you, would be a disrespectful way of thinking about it to the survivor community. Even the fact that I use the word survivor shows where I came. I think 3 years ago when this conversation happened, I would have empathetically used the word victim. And I had to learn that there are certain words that the community of people who have been victimized draw offense to. And that didn't happen overnight. And so the other thing I would say is I have two beautiful daughters and a church full of incredible children and women. Why would we not want to talk about this issue until we all feel as though we've addressed it in putting every church in the best possible position to do everything it can to keep every child and every woman safe and encouraged?
Brother Thomas?
Yeah, the issue is not going away. And so we need to remain diligent. We need to keep the conversation going and keep continuing to keep this issue fresh in our church's minds, not only to care for those who are hurting, but to also to continue to remain diligent in safeguarding the ministries that they are stewarding.
You know, we have to keep it in front of people. The problem and the challenge is in the survivor community, and I happen to be a survivor, is that they want the change, and I'm a part of that. We want to see the change happen. And sometimes you get tired and weary and not seeing the change happen fast enough. It can never be fast enough for those that are walking through that. However, as DJ alluded to, this just takes time. And it's, as we've talked about before, this is a generational change, right? This is not something that's going to happen in a year or even 5 years probably, because it's got to go all the way down to our local churches, our local associations, our states. And so we must not, as Marshall, our chairman, shared in one of our meetings this last couple of days, that we have to not grow weary in doing what is right. Sometimes this is wearisome, it's tiresome, it's frustrating. You feel like we've moved the ball. And I guess one of my hopes this year is that we moved. I use this analogy, a football analogy, I love football, but we got to move it from the goal line. If we get everybody to the 25-yard line, we've made progress. The goal is not to get to touchdown yet. Now, will some folks get there? Yes. Will some churches get there? Yes. Have some states made huge strides to get there? Yes. But if we can get a lot more people down the field further than where they were, then I consider that a success. And we're going to continue that pattern and that progress over and over and over again.
Now, we met, most of us, or at the meeting down in Atlanta, we've had multiple talks across state leaders, and one of the things I've noticed is that every state convention seems to be in a different place. How is your state choosing to tackle this? Brad, I'll start with you. How's your state choosing to tackle this issue? What specific things are you guys doing to move this forward?
Well, we're kind of in a unique spot since I'm on the ARITF. We're kind of piggybacking at the same time. We're kind of doing together some of these same things together, so it's been kind of beneficial. We're working on multiple platforms. One of the biggest things that we're working on a resource for our convention coming up in October. Our full-blown report, because we were kind of, as Mississippi can be sometimes, we're a little late to the game in getting our stuff together, and so we didn't form a task force until July and August of last year. So we'll be presenting a full report in October. But one of the things I'm most excited about is in 2024, our goal, and if some Mississippi folks are listening, they haven't ever heard this yet, but our goal is to get to every single association in 2024 with a guide, with information and specifically targeting our small church and bivocational pastors. So it's not a 6-hour all-day meeting. It's hopefully going to be an hour and a half to 2 hours, feed them a meal and get this information, because really what I've become convinced of over this last year is that if we ever have any chance of seeing reform and change happen, culturally changing, then it has to begin at the associational level, because that's where the local church and these churches we really desperately want to reach, that's where they are. So that's probably the most exciting thing that where we are in Mississippi.
Brother Jordan, what are you guys doing in Oklahoma?
Well, in Oklahoma, our state leadership about 15 years ago had a vision for addressing this issue.
Wow.
So we are maybe a little further ahead of some of the state conventions, but I can tell you the effort that never needs to stop. So we've been doing awareness training in regional events, again starting about 15 years ago, live regional events, and then more recently we have our state task force put together a resource for our churches. It's got a lot of good information in it, but it's brief, but then it has QR codes that allow churches to go access more information if they want to learn more about a specific subject. We still continue to do live regional events, and about 6 or 7 years ago, our statewide women's retreat that occurred at Falls Creek, they took up an offering, and over $40,000 was given at that offering. And those resources have been used to help churches pay for training, to go subscribe to training. And then now we're using some of those funds still to provide access to online training. We expect to have around 5,000 hours of training into the hands of our churches this year. And that's tied to our camps, and it's we're like I said, we've had a 15-year start on this, and our task force has done a great job putting a new resource into our church's hands.
I want to comment if I can, and I just want to thank Thomas. This is one of the things that's been exciting, John, is that states cooperating together, working together, sharing information. One of the things that's happened when we had the sex abuse response team that started this a couple of years ago, and now the ARITF, been able to share information. So I'm really grateful as a Mississippian to benefit from Oklahoma's work. And so Thomas has been very gracious to share information. Nobody's being proprietary of their information. South Carolina's done the same. And I need to correct myself before I slam my Mississippi friends that I'm a Mississippian. We've been doing training since 2013. We've just not done the holistic approach. We've been doing Ministry Safe for over a decade now, which is fantastic. But there's more to do in that regard. But I just want to say thank you, Thomas, from some of our smaller state conventions are going to benefit from the work, and DJ also in South Carolina, the work that you guys have done, Maryland, Delaware, some others that have really helped us propel the work forward faster than it would have been if we had to come with some of the stuff from scratch. We're grateful for folks like you who dug in the ditch a little earlier than the rest of us. So thank you, Thomas.
Absolutely. So I'm pretty proud of our response in South Carolina. We decided to form a task force a little bit earlier in the game to get ready for last summer's Revelation and to begin to prepare. And then we just made the decision that amidst all of the politicization of it, which is very unfortunate, we may get to that, what do we do to put South Carolina Baptist churches in the best possible position to gauge where they are and to get better? You know, to use a football analogy, I know a little bit about football. You really never plan for touchdowns. You plan for first downs. And you get enough of those and you'll score every time. And so we are a convention of churches that vary in their size and their implementation. So our task force went to work to say, let's take the national report, let's take the best information, and let's create something that will not intimidate a pastor or a leader, but encourage them to be honest about where they are and then to take the next steps. But probably the one thing I would say that has not been mentioned, while it may not be unique to South Carolina, is that, people follow people.
Yes.
And one of the mistakes we discovered early on that I think all of us made inadvertently was to say this can be programmed. We can get a bunch of resources together and that'll address it. But when we want to share our faith, we hire an evangelism guy. When we want to develop preachers, we go find a good preacher. And we just really felt like in South Carolina, our state convention employees were incredible, but we didn't have a person to really own this and be the champion. Pastors don't think about booklets, pamphlets, downloadable software. I want to call somebody and I want to ask some questions. Right. So we approved last year at our annual meeting to budget to hire a position for someone to dedicate themselves to this endeavor, to help in prevention and then to help churches react when abuse takes place. We're in the process of hiring that person right now. Really excited about that.
And this is why we wanted to have this conversation, because our conventions are helping churches prevent abuse in many different ways. And these are just some of the examples that we've come across over this last year as we've interacted with so many different state conventions. But I want to ask kind of the I think the big hairy rooster in the room, and I'm going to send this over to you, Brother Jordan, the legal implications behind this. Everybody is scared to get sued. Nobody wants to touch it with a 10-foot pole. Why should we care about sexual abuse in our churches from a legal standpoint?
Well, of course, first we care because we care about the individuals and we want to take care of people, and we do not want to jeopardize the platform that we have for sharing the gospel. Legally, obviously, there's a significant risk for failing to take proper precautions in setting up ministries to put safety precautions in place. But we cannot be afraid of this subject, first because we care about the individuals, but second, when we put forth effort to put those safety precautions in place, the people who are participating in our ministries, they see that and they appreciate that, and so when if something does come up, if there's a question about something that happened, if everybody sees that, hey, we tried. That our families see that we tried, our guests see that we put stuff in place. Right. They see that, and they're less likely to blame you as the designer of that ministry, because they know it's evident. So that's where we need to put our efforts into. And let our people know these are the things that we're doing. We don't just put this in place. We let our people know that we're putting those things in place.
Definitely. Anybody else want to jump in on that?
Well, I would just say, the same God we believe and trust sovereignly in the pulpit we can trust him through litigation. Amen. And if you gave me the choice between taking action to protect and prevent abuse or face litigation, I'll face litigation. Anybody with children, I'd much rather deal with a lawsuit and sleep well at night. The other thing I would say is that there are a great deal of laws that people are ignorant about that protect churches. What people look at when a lawsuit is mentioned is, was there a reasonable amount of effort in place, and then was the protocol followed? Right. The first thing a consultant and attorney is going to do is they're going to look at your documentation. The second thing they're going to do is say, do you follow your documentation? And so, Marshall, who's a dear friend of mine, your chairman, who I love greatly, and I've so appreciated his leadership in this, said something to me once in a conversation. We were talking, and I was encouraging him, and he said, everybody wants to do something about sexual abuse until it costs them something. Yeah. And at the end of the day, I think it's a bit naive to say we're going to tackle this very difficult subject and it not cost us some risk. Right. But it's a risk worth taking. And when we do the hard things, our people appreciate it. I'll give you a perfect example. Yes. When we finished our task force report, I took a look at it and where we were as a church and popped the hood. And I think one of the mistakes we make is that we look at the bottom line, right, and we say, yeah, I can walk by that booth, I'm good, because I have a check-in station and we run mandatory background checks. Those are awesome. but that's just the beginning.
Right.
The vast majority of abusers passed mandatory background checks because the vast majority of abusers are never told on, never prosecuted, never found guilty. So do we do background checks? Yes. Do we check at the door? Absolutely. But you have to do more than that.
Right.
And we were not large church, by Baptist standards, very large church. And I canceled Sunday night childcare, which put about 300 adults who were doing small groups on Sunday nights out. And the reason was our 2-adult trained per room policy could not be followed. We couldn't turn it around from the end of last semester to this semester.
Wow.
So we just made the decision. I made a 14-minute video explaining it. Didn't have a single person push back when we explained it. Now, again, is that a huge cost compared to a survivor? No. But you have to be willing to make those decisions if you are serious about the subject.
So, gentlemen, what do you think is missing from our conversations on sexual abuse in our churches and in our states?
Well, I think one of the things, at least that I've discovered, I think we've done a lot of Oklahoma, Mississippi, South Carolina. To start with, we've done really well in the starting, at least in the prevention phases, the training phases. One of the things that I've learned, even as a survivor, we've not cared very well for those inside of our churches who've experienced abuse. And we have in some levels. It's not that we've completely ignored the issue totally. We've referred to counselors, we've referred people that we knew about, but what we didn't realize is how many people are hiding inside of our pews and our chairs that have experienced abuse. We know the stats, we talk about it all the time, but we continue to say them so people hear them, that 1 in 4 women, 1 in 6 men, though I did reiterate that number is higher, I believe, with all my heart, because men don't often report. They report much less than women do. So you're talking 25% or 25 out of every 100 people sitting in your church have more than likely experienced abuse. If you think about 1 in 25 women have experienced abortion, another soft topic, but you got another 25% of your church that are hurting. Some of those could overlap in those topics. And so we've got to be so aware that we've got to care as a church, and not just, and here was the challenge for me. I met a guy by the name of Dr. James Reeves, has a series called Fearless for Women and Men that's designed to help churches come alongside survivors and even still victims and help them come to a place of help and hope and healing. That it's not just dump them off to a counselor and say, here you go, and man, let me know how it turns out. But instead, it's a partnership as a church and with counseling, both and, not either or, that we come alongside those folks and really genuinely and deeply care for them. And of course, the flip side of this, we show that we care about the prevention side for sure. There's no question that we care about the issue, but to care about them and their story, as I mentioned yesterday, we were talking, whenever I share my story in a different church setting, or I've shared in my church, and it's been a while since I've shared it, every single time I've shared it over the last 30 plus years, somebody comes up to me and says, I have that story. And what I have at least most every time is I'll have somebody tell me these magical words I've never told anybody until I'm telling you, but I was abused 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I had a 70-year-old lady one time tell me she had carried it her whole life.
Wow.
Another lady in my church, she had a minister of music in her past 30, 40 years prior, never told anybody. Her parents didn't know. And so these folks are living in darkness and in struggling by themselves, and we don't want them to do that. We as a church want to open our hearts and our arms to them to say we want to offer things that we can come alongside you and not just be silent and say, hey, go see a counselor. But we as a church want to speak into this issue in your life.
Gentlemen, what is missing from this conversation in our states?
Yeah, I want to echo what Brad said. Just that from the state convention perspective, I do think, and I'll just speak personally, that's probably been part of the conversation that has been missing is the care side.
Yeah.
We have put a lot of resources into the prevention side, but we're still working on the care side, and how we can help from the state convention do that. And it is raising the awareness of you. There are a lot of victims. There are a lot of survivors, and making that real to the churches, making that real. There's somebody sitting in the pew next to you. Pastor, there's somebody in your congregation that's dealing with this. And when you do talk about prevention, that's what's been so surprising to me. When you do talk about prevention, so many people come forward and say, this is my story. Right. So, yeah, on the care side, I think that's the next big step for us.
I don't have the involvement in the ARTF the way you do, or nor the legal counsel. Just as a senior pastor, and certainly I hope this is taken respectfully. I think optimism is missing. I think we're going to whip this thing. We're not going to eliminate sin. We're not going to eliminate sexual abuse. But I think if we keep working at this, we're going to look up in a decade, and I don't like to use the word average. I don't mean average in its anointing from God.
Right.
But the average Southern Baptist church, the bread and butter of our convention, the church out there with 125, the church out there with 200, the church plant with 30 people, the revitalization effort of a primarily senior adult population in a changing community, learning to love folks of different color, learning to love people of different backgrounds, where people walk in who are not Southern Baptists and say, I'm impressed by your plan. I've never seen resources like this in a church of 125.
Right.
And you know, when you ask people to be a part of something difficult, you better remind them it's not only worthy, we can win.
Yeah.
Now, again, we're not going to eliminate sin. We're not going to eliminate abuse.
Yeah.
But I don't find the survivors rooting against us. I don't find that. I think there are a few who have been mischaracterized.
Yeah.
I think there are many survivors pulling for us, saying, great, I'm glad you're talking about this. Now let's move the ball. And I think it's important for leaders in pulpits to say it's complex and it's heavy, but we can win.
Yeah.
We can get this done, and we can be better.
Yes.
So, Pastor Horton, you know what the Bible, and I think many of us know what the Bible teaches about abuse.
Yeah.
Yet, many of us still find our hearts hardened and hindered. What would you be your pastoral counsel to us on this subject of that if we feel ourselves being hardened or even hindered in wanting to enter the subject?
I think you've already mentioned the answer. Get in your Bible and have your heart transformed to be like your Savior, who was empathetic, and then just talk to people. I was preaching in 1 Corinthians this year, not about abuse, but about sexual sin in the church, and I took that opportunity to explain the work I'd been doing in the state convention, because it's not something I talk about every Sunday. Like you, I was shocked at the line of women who came to me and said, I've got a story. Thank you for, not thank you for preventing it, because I'm not the solution. Just thank you for mentioning it.
Yeah.
I felt seen and known that this happened to me, and I've got a couple of emails I saved where I can think of one. Her name is Angela, and she's a beautiful woman in our church in her 50s, raised wonderful daughters. She shared a story of being abused, not in a church, in a home, and she was brought to church, and the Sunday school teacher told her that God loved her, and it began to change her life. The overwhelming majority of Southern Baptists have never or will never abuse anybody.
That's right. That's right.
We are not trying to characterize our convention as a group of people who are housing predators, but we are sinners. And therefore, among us, there are some who do some terribly sinful things. Right. And for them, to me, it's a salvation issue. It's a sanctification issue. And I want to say to the community that we're trying to minister to, you are seen and you are known, and your story matters.
That's right. And I would say, I would echo that. You know, Jesus is so clear about this issue. It is so clearly a gospel issue. It's almost shocking that we act like this is not one to me, because it's the Old Testament is wrought with verses. Jesus talks about caring for children, for the least of these, for those who are oppressed, for those who need justice, those who are hidden. And so I think it's abundantly clear. My question is, how can we not speak into this issue? Right. And it's a shame it's taken us this long to speak into this issue. So that in and of itself is our sin to own and to say, Lord, forgive us for that. But now we're going to speak into it. And I love what you said, DJ. I'm optimistic too. I think we're going to whip this thing. It's going to take a while, but we're going to get there. And if we don't stop and quit. But the other thing I would say too is along that line of is that helping churches understand. One of the things that we talk to AMSs about, understand this issue and the gospel issue and how this works. One AMS guy said to me, an associational missional strategist said, too often our churches feel like, and even associations, that our state conventions and our SBC come down and tell us this is what you must do. Right. Like they're speaking from on high. That's the feeling and the perception sometimes. And he said, instead, what they want to sense and feel from us is these are things we want to do with you and for you. And that was a really compelling moment for me in January when we started to have those conversations. And so my tone in my conversation, though the idea is the same, but the approach is we want to help you help your church become the safest place on planet Earth. Amen. That is our hope, and a place that can provide hope, help, and healing for those who have experienced abuse. That's our greatest desire, and that's the gospel. That is the gospel in a nutshell.
Brother Jordan, how can we be agents of change and ambassadors of change in our states? You guys have been doing it for 15 years. You kind of led the way in many different ways, been a partner with the ARITF. But how, when we go back home, when we leave the convention, all the votes are cast and we get back to our local church, how can we go back as ambassadors of unity and agents of change?
Yeah, and I want to, again, echo something Brad said. From the state convention level, we're there to serve the local church. And we want to provide those resources, the information. I do think I really appreciate your story about speaking up as a pastor. I think that hearing from the pulpit really opens the door for a lot of conversations.
Amen.
We are a convention led by pastors.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's where it starts. A lot of our younger generations have grown up with maybe a heightened awareness of this issue, and you have a new army coming forward that's ready to tackle this issue because they're aware of it, and they're having kids, they're raising kids, and so you have a new army that's ready to tackle this issue. So churches need to be aware of that. We have somebody that's already ready because of the culture that they're coming from. So reach out to those younger generations and get them involved, because they're not afraid of it. They know this is something we need to deal with.
One thing I would just add for pastors, set Twitter aside.
Amen.
And just ask a question.
Can you say that too in the camera?
Yeah, well, just set Twitter. Just ask a question. Here's the question. The scripture says pastors will be held to a higher standard. That's why we have local church membership. I don't have a verse in the Bible that says, and on thy 8th visit thou shalt join the church, if thy pastor remembereth thy name. I don't have that verse. But I do have a church history that says, as the church moved from Jerusalem into cities, and then when a city developed so many believers it would meet in your house or my house, you quickly developed local church membership.
Yes.
And it's really built around the theology of pastoring.
Yeah.
I have to know who my congregants are so that I can practice church discipline. Church discipline's not church punishment. I mean, so I can shape the congregation's theological identity.
Right.
So that means I'm going to stand before God. I'm going to give an account for how I led my congregation. I'm not accountable for every sin they commit. I'm not accountable for every, human error we make. But I'll stand before God and I'll give an account. Did I protect the gospel?
Yeah.
I protect the doctrine.
Yeah.
And did I shepherd my people? So put Twitter aside, and every pastor in our convention would ask this question. In regards to preventing sexual abuse in children and our ladies, primarily, I know men can be targeted, but it's children and ladies, and then responding to survivors, am I doing everything in my power? The answer is always no. Mm-hmm. So then the second question, what can I do this year? In other words, I'm pastoring a church of 150 in a rural community. I may not have camera systems for the entire campus that my friend does at a church of 3,000. But I can implement this step, right, and this step and this step. So refuse to allow opinions that will never be held accountable for your church to inform how you shepherd your people.
Amen.
I think that's very important.
That's a good word, brother. That's a good word.
One other thing to add, John, quickly, the vulnerable adults, we can't leave that out. I know we talk about that. The Maryland-Delaware state exec reminded us he has a child that's profoundly, and I know you weren't leaving out intentionally.
No. Thank you for agreeing.
It's important because both those categories, the percentage that get abused,
it goes way
vulnerable
up.
adults is like astronomically high compared to boys and girls and even women. So just want to add that to you. Go ahead, John.
Oh, I appreciate that. See, I think we could continue going on. I mean, we've done 30 minutes and it only feels like 15. There's so much that we could talk about, but I think the end statement I want to leave on is this, is that we have much work to do, but the ball's moving in the right direction. And I find many parallels with many different other struggles that our convention has, but we know that it is worth the fight. Because this ends up being a gospel issue that if we don't do anything about it, hinders the hearing of the gospel in our states and in our churches. And if we do something about it, actually creates a bridge for others to be able to hear and move forward with it, with this next generation, as Brother Jordan was talking about. And I think it is critical for every one of our churches, every one of our conventions to lean in and say, how do we address this issue head on? I think it's best when we drive through the storm to get to the other side than to sit in the storm and weep, or run from it when it's going to catch up to us. And as long as we're running where the Lord asks us to run, in the direction he asks us to do, we will do his will and his kingdom will be accomplished. Guys, I thank you so much for this time. I thank you so much for this conversation, and I hope it was a blessing to you guys in the audience. May God bless you.